Well, you see that in the story of Moses, which is a classic leadership story. Moses isn't verbal. And he tells God that when God comes along and says, like, well, you're going to stand up against tyranny and you're going to lead the slaves out of captivity, which is what people are always doing in their life if they have any sense. Moses' first objection is, well, you know, the tradition has it that he had a speech impediment or something like that. Like, it's actually quite a severe impediment. So he has Aaron, who's his communicator, right? And so, you know, you pointed to something there. People often assume that leadership means charismatic speaking, for example. Well, the kind of public communication leadership that you and I are doing depends on that. But that's by no means the only way of being an effective leader. I would say it's probably much more akin to what we've been talking about in terms of play. It's like a good leader is someone who can continually create games and present them to people that they want to play. And there's lots of ways of doing that. You can do that and be quiet, be quiet. Like I had a client, a lawyer. He ran a big law firm in Toronto. I worked with lawyers like that for quite a while, and they were sent to this little organization I was part of. The value proposition to the law firms was, you send me your best people and we'll work to make them 15% more productive, which for those people meant a lot, right? But we work for them, not you. And so then what we were doing with each of these people was radically different. It really depended on the person. And one of the guys that really struck me, he was very, very quiet. And all he did in his office, all he did was go around and listen to people and actually listen. And so he could get wind of interpersonal conflicts of the sort you were describing, you know, the power game conflicts, just before they were developing, right? People would tell him what was wrong. And because he was listening, he could fix the things that were wrong with just like a tap and a nudge, right? Because he did it before they got out of control. And it was really interesting to watch him operate, because it really looked, even to him, like he was doing very little as the manager of this law firm. But what he was doing was exactly the right amount at exactly the right time. And he was doing that because he was like, and his orientation was true. He wanted the firm to function as well as it possibly could. And that's genuinely what he wanted. And he didn't care whether people, he didn't even care if he knew that what he was doing was effective, much less what other. So there's a gospel statement that's very mysterious. You shouldn't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. It's like, well, what does that mean? It means you shouldn't even be concerned about whether you give yourself credit for what you've accomplished. You know, now there's a boundary on that, because credit where credit is due. But if you're undertaking the task just so that you feel better about yourself in your own eyes, you're contaminating the motivation. Yeah. The better motivation is this mentoring motivation. And I think it really is. It's a cause for optimism that that's such a deep source of meaning, you know, because you know as well as I do that there are lots of young people, we'll talk about young men for a moment, who feel lost. It's like, where am I going to find the meaning in my life? And if you can let people know that one of the deepest possible sources of meaning that you can tap, that's more or less it's unfathomable, right? It never stops giving, is the meaning that comes as a consequence of working on behalf of the appropriate development of other people.
Yeah, when people come to me and they say, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what my goals should be.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of lost.
Yeah.
I always tell them, go help other people.
Right.
Go help other people.
Right.
Like, you'll find some direction. I don't care if you go down to a soup kitchen or you go to a boys club where their kids need mentoring or they need someone to teach them how to throw a baseball or whatever the case may be. Whatever you can do, you go and help people.
Yep.
And you're gonna find some direction really quickly.
Yep.
When you realize that you're just a little bit ahead of them in life.
Yep.
And you can give them so much, and that's going to be very powerful.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that psychologists discovered, although not nearly enough has been made of this, is so imagine we've discovered the basic dimensions of human temperament: extroversion, positive emotion, neuroticism, negative emotion, agreeableness, so that's like, say, aggression versus cooperation, something like that, with the attendant problems on both ends: conscientiousness, dutifulness, orderliness, industriousness, and creativity. Those are the 5. All right, so let's look at neuroticism, proclivity to feel negative emotion. All the negative emotions clump together. So they have a common core. It's probably something like stop and leave, something like that, right? Because if you're threatened, you should freeze or get the hell out of there. So that's the core reaction around which all the negative emotions are built, and they all associate. Okay. We've been able to do analysis of traits and attitudes that are tightly associated with negative emotion. Self-consciousness is indistinguishable from negative emotion, which means like it's indistinguishable. In fact, in one of the major personality trait measures called the Neo-PIR, one of the early big 5 personality dimensions, self-consciousness is a facet of negative emotion. That's how tight it is. It's the same thing. So what it means is, and this is very germane to your point, if you're thinking about yourself, you're miserable. Those are the same thing. And so then you might say, well, how do you get out of that? And you can't get out of that by not thinking about yourself. That's just going to backfire, right? So if you're anxious and you go to a party and you think, I'm not going to think about myself, and that's all you're thinking about, like you're dead. I used to treat my socially anxious clients, say, go to a party and do everything you can to make other people feel comfortable. So I would explain to them what I just explained to you, but I would say, that doesn't mean you can stop thinking about yourself. It means you can start only thinking about what you can provide to other people. And that was invariably an improvement on the strategy that they had been using. But this is so crucially important, you know, because we are so reciprocal as human beings that you are lost if you only serve your own whims. It doesn't work in the long run. It alienates people. It produces a life that's devoid of meaning. It makes you anxious and isolated. And it makes you self-conscious and miserable. And so it is the case, as we alluded to earlier, that perversely enough, the best possible thing that you can do for yourself, all things considered, over the longest possible run, is to work as hard as you can on behalf of what's best in other people. Well, yeah, well, like you said, I don't think there's a better definition of chaos than warfare. Like, obviously, that's a place where the rules are suspended. So then the question would be, well, what's the best possible mindset to bring to bear on a situation where the rules have been suspended, right? You can certainly see that distribution of responsibility and an appeal to voluntarism is going to be of great utility under those, not least so you don't get shot in the back by your own men. So that's got to be allied with that willingness to incorporate information from the bottom up, because you're going to get, so that's where the diversity claims of the radical left have some utility, is like, well, in any open-ended situation, you want a genuine diversity of viewpoints because the situation is shifting, and the more options you have in front of you, up to some limited degree, because, you know, time to process all those options also matters. You don't want a uniformity of opinion, because you're going to run into this problem that you just described. I was on Bill Maher's show at one point, and it was me and a bunch of people who were, at least under the current circumstances, more liberal than me, and they were going off on Trump and the MAGA types. And I brought the conversation to a halt by asking them how that attitude, essentially of contempt that they brought to bear on the situation, was going to serve them, given that that was 50% of the population and they're going to have to live with them, right? And so this ARC thing that we put together in London, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, one of the rules that we're attempting to implement, we're afraid that any enterprise that's international visionary, let's say, will have a proclivity to turn into something authoritarian in like no time flat.
You could make a cool movie about that.
Yeah, well,
right?
no kidding.
The arc goes wild.
Well, no kidding, absolutely. One of our principles is that any policy that you have to implement by manipulation or force is at minimum suboptimal, right? That you need voluntary buy-in. And that's something like consent of the governed. But I also think that it's more just a counsel of wisdom, because it's a lot easier to lead people where they want to go. And it's really incumbent, it's kind of a definition of leadership, you know, is that you have to find out where people want to go. And you should assume that maybe they have the reasons for the decisions that they made. And then you can help them strategize about how that might be undertaken and what their respective roles might be. It's very useful as well to give, not to give them something that's important to do, but to encourage them to take on something important to do and then to back the hell off so they can do it.